Here's my argument. Premise 1. If God exists, then God is in time. This is true because God is related to the world as cause to effect. But a cause must exist either before or at the same time as its effect. So God must be in time. Premise 2. If God is in time, then a privileged observer exists. Since God transcends the world and is the cause of the existence of everything in the world, his perspective on the world is the true perspective. He is thus a privileged observer. 3. If a privileged observer exists, then an absolute now exists. Since God is such a privileged observer, his now is privileged. And thus there is an absolute now, just as Lorentz claimed. Now, this is a very startling conclusion indeed. In this case, a theological perspective can help to adjudicate between physically equivalent interpretations of a scientific theory. It's hard to imagine how Christianity could be more of a friend to science than that. There's so much more that deserves to be said on this, but these 4 cases furnish some examples of the fruitful interaction between science and Christianity, a continuation of a centuries-old alliance in the search for truth that has been renewed in our generation.
I'd like to thank God. Are we alive here? Can you hear me? I think we're on. Oh, here we go. I'd like to thank God for turning the microphone on. I'd like to thank him for organising the telecast on the ABC last night of the programme on parallel universes. Did anyone see it here? Yeah. Okay. I was suggesting at our last encounter that the M theory is going to completely explode Bill's affection for science and is totally and absolutely untenable with any Christian theology, no matter how you torment and twist it. There it was last night being discussed by a number of scientists whom I have in fact talked to on the matter on my wireless program. What we have is a new theory which is gaining immense power and is regarded by many of the first rank of science as being the theory of everything. In other words, the final equation to be written on a blackboard which surpasses even V equals mc squared and all the other theorising that go from the subatomic to the cosmological. Bill has to have a creation. He relies very heavily on the Big Bang, which he says is analogous to Christian mythology. He talks about time beginning with the singularity. It is now, looks very like that's all wrong. M theory does not transcend string theory, it transcends subatomic particle theory, and it comes up with immense membranes which contain, or which collide, overlap, coil around each other. And then their colliding and interaction, like waves hitting each other, like great ocean waves, produce forces and vortexes beyond imagination. And out of that comes not one Big Bang, but millions and billions, an infinity of Big Bangs going on for all eternity, having preceded this moment in time by all eternity. In other words, the Big Bang, the incarnation in which we dwell, is simply one of billions and billions and billions of coexisting universes. Can we get that feedback turned down? Thank you very much. So instead of this incarnation, we are just one of many, of countless, and the metaphor was used. Imagine this universe as being a bubble floating in an endless sea of other bubbles. And with those other bubbles, very often the mathematics, it is postulated, don't work out, that the laws of physics are different, they do not resolve in the happy way they do in our incarnation, and they fail. In other words, the bubbles pop. But what it argues is that everything will happen, has happened, or is happening as we speak. In other words, there are universes beside us that we can't conceive of, but they're there. They are mathematically demonstrable to exist, and in them, John Howard is not the Prime Minister. In them, the dinosaurs still rule. In them, there are just everything that any science fiction writer or ourselves could imagine, and beyond it. There are billions and billions of dead universes, but there are billions and billions of fecund universes in which civilizations of one sort or another and intelligent life are forming, have formed, or will form. Now, this is not the paradigm of science that Bill is discussing. It completely and utterly replaces it, and if it's half right, and it looks at the moment, the exhilaration being felt in the scientific community right across the spectrum of scientific investigation is that model is out the window, and we are now dealing with a universe which is infinitely more astonishing than anything we might have imagined. It is not a universe in which I submit one story about a crucified carpenter is a sufficient explanation. But let's just deal with this universe. Let's just deal with this one. Let's imagine this is the only one we have. Is Christianity and science, or do they get on like happy little Vegemites? Well, I don't know about that. I simply don't know about that, nor did Galileo. He is the most, incidentally, in parenthesis, I should also like to protest that Christianity is absolutely crucial to science. A great deal of science has nothing to do with it. Einstein was not a Christian. And in fact, many of the greatest scientists of the 20th century, and indeed the 21st, are not Christians. They're Jews, and some of them, believe it or not, are even Muslim. The Greeks had a fairly good idea about the circulation of the blood. They had an idea about atoms. They had a pretty good idea about planets. That information was lost with the rise of Christianity, not to be rediscovered for many centuries. The idea that the earth was round was postulated by the non-Christian librarian at Alexandria. I'm currently involved in the project to rebuild the great Alexandrian library. And I love the story about the librarian who a couple of thousand years ago heard that at noon a stick shoved into the stand at Karnak cast a shadow, while the same stick or similar stick shoved into the sand beside him in Alexandria did not. From that tiny bit of evidence, he guessed that the world might be round, and he hired a guy to walk all the way from Alexandria to Karnak and count his steps. And out of that, he calculated the size of the globe and got it pretty right. All of this was lost with the rise of Christianity, not to be rediscovered for many years. In fact, again and again, Christianity was quite miffed by scientific discovery. I take the view that all knowledge involves pain. You learn about gravity when you fall out of a tree. You learn about heat when you burn your fingers. You learn about injustice when your mum or dad or kids at school are cruel to you. Knowledge involves pain. And I think for Christianity, science has given it a great deal of pain and it hasn't liked it at all. I will not deny, however, that very often great scientific work, or work that became known as scientific, natural philosophy, was being conducted by, yes, people of religious persuasion or monks. But it seems to me that they were trying to validate what they read in the Bible. They were trying to demonstrate that what their faith told them was true. And again and again and again, their science proved them wrong. So once again, knowledge involved pain. Imagine the pain to the Roman Catholic Church when Galileo confirms the Copernican view that we are not at the centre of our solar system, let alone at the centre of the universe. Little wonder that Galileo's close friend, until then, suddenly decides this man is dangerous and, promoted to papacy, shuts him up and the threat virtually of death and a lifetime in prison. But that's only one of the hundreds of sort of stories about the struggle of science with religion. Charles Darwin studied for the clergy. He was going to be an Anglican priest. He wasn't particularly a believing one, but his father, who was very anxious for Charles to have a respectable life, told him that he'd get a lot of respect as an Anglican cleric. Later, however, he goes off on a memorable sea voyage, and he comes back from that with the greatest scientific idea in history. And I think most scientists would acknowledge that the most powerful of all scientific ideas is evolution. Not only was Darwin's Christian wife outraged by Charles's discovery and totally opposed to him publishing, but Darwin knew that the theory of evolution, of the descent of man, would in fact wreak havoc within the church, and he delayed publishing it for much of his life. In fact, he only published it finally when an analogous theory produced in our neck of the woods, not far away from Australia, in Southeast Asia, was about to see the light of day. Then and only then does he publish, and of course all hell breaks loose. Darwin is